This is the simple math that you need to know when you're getting into residential real estate, okay? When I talk about residential real estate, there's a few different ways you could do it. It could be your single family primary residence you live in. It could be single family homes you're buying as rental property. It could be duplexes or fourplexes that still qualify as non-commercial properties. Where I live, as soon as you get 5 units or more, now we start talking about commercial financing, and we're not going to talk about commercial financing today. We're only going to talk about residential, something where you can get a regular loan at a regular lender and make your entry point into real estate work for you, okay? So question number one we're going to answer quite a few of these, but the first one is this: big down payment versus small down payment, okay? Depending on your situation, again, this all becomes personal. Let's talk about the pros and cons of big down payments versus small down payments. Obviously, if you put a big down payment, the idea is to make that monthly principal and interest, taxes, and insurance payment on that property to be as low as possible. And you might put a big down payment because you want that payment lower so you can make the property cash flow. You might decide you're not trying to get cash flow, so you're going to put down a smaller down payment so you can leave some cash in your pocket maybe to do some things to this property, and it'll make that monthly payment a little bigger. Some of this will just depend on your personal situation. Are you looking for cash flow? Are you hoping for appreciation? Are you younger? Are you older? I know for me, I bought some single family homes in the Midwest. They are not going to appreciate as fast as my homes here would in Reno, Nevada, but those homes I could buy for a lot less money, and I can make them cash flow for me a lot better than what I could here. So I bought in the Midwest for cash flow, and I own property on the West Coast that I'm looking for appreciation. So that bigger or smaller down payment just depends on your strategy, your cash position, and what might work good or bad for you, okay? Next, what type of loan do I want to do? Now, you can do 15-year mortgages. You can do 30-year mortgages. And of course, now we're starting to talk about the 50-year mortgage. And why would anyone want to do a 50-year mortgage? Well, here's the thing about all three of these mortgages. It is very rare that someone buys a property and makes the payment for 15 years or 30 years or potentially now 50 years and never moves or never sells or never refinances. So when they talk about, how much interest you're going to pay on these loans or on these mortgages, a lot of that is just sort of fluff where they're just trying to start an argument with you. Here's the thing. The longer the term, so if you're talking about a 50-year mortgage versus a 30-year mortgage, the longer the term, the more of that payment is going to go towards the interest rather than the principal. So if I took a 30-year versus a 15-year, same thing. More money goes towards interest than the principal. Now, the reason why you go with the longer term is ideally you're making the payment each month smaller. And by doing that, by extending out those terms and you're making the payment smaller each month, you are over the lifetime of the loan going to pay way more interest than you do in principal. But if the only way, let's say you were buying a house to try to get into, and the only way you could get into a house initially was on a 50-year mortgage, and we had a conversation about it, and it made sense for you to know, I'm going to do this 50-year mortgage for a year or 2 or 3, and then I'm going to refinance out into a 30 or 15-year for who knows what your personal reasons might be. Maybe you're about to be fiance or spouse is going to get a job, but they got 1 more year of college. Or maybe at the job that you're in that in a year someone's retiring and you're going to take over their business and you're going to get promoted or you're going to make a bunch more money. There's some risk involved in those things, but there's no 100% this is good, this is bad. Again, personal finance is personal, and it's knowing what your situation is and what makes sense. There's also what's called an adjustable rate mortgage, where you can lock in a rate for a year or 2 or 3, and then that rate at the annual date could go up or down. I did that on my very first house, and people thought I was crazy, but I understood the product. I knew what I was doing, and I was locked in for the first 3 years. It had a 1% per year increase cap. Didn't mean it would automatically go up 1%, but that was the most it could go up in 1 year. And then we knew what the total cap was. And we were only planning on living in that house for 5 years, and it worked out great. We were in it 3 years. When the rate changed, it almost didn't move at all. We lived in there for another year, and then we sold the house and we moved on. But we understood the product and we knew what we were doing. So you have to understand the difference between 15, 30, 50-year mortgages. And for somebody that might want to buy a house cash, what are the pros and cons of buying the house cash? So it's not a one size fits all. It's understanding what happens. Okay. Now, primary residence. When you go out and buy a primary residence, especially if you're someone who's doing an FHA or a VA loan versus a conventional loan, you have to put down a down payment. And it could be as little as small as 3 to 5%. It might be bigger, like 10 or 20%. Depends again on your personal situation. That's having a conversation with the lender. And if you have good credit, you might be able to get a lower rate. You might be able to figure out what makes sense for your starting point. So again, Primary residence, you can put a smaller down payment. And this is what's nice is if you go out and buy a primary residence and you put 3 or 5% down and you keep the house for 5 or 10 years and you've now built up this equity position, you can then go buy another primary residence, because we're going to talk about now if you buy a rental property. When you buy a rental property, typically you're going to have to put 20 or 25% down. And 20 or 25% down is a whole lot more money than maybe potentially that 3 or 5% that you could put on a primary residence. So you got to talk to your lender, because there are rules. When you buy a primary residence, you typically got to live in it for at least 12 or 24 months before you can turn it into a rental property. But as long as you move into it and as long as you do live there for a certain length of time, you're not going to be getting in trouble for committing some sort of loan fraud saying, hey, you're out here saying you're buying primary residences and then you never move in the house and you bought a rental. You can't do that. But the benefit is on a primary, the down payment is a lot smaller than if you're buying a rental property, okay? And why is this a cheat code? Why is this a house hack? Well, again, for what I just said, if you could buy a rental property and you're not thinking of it as rental property, this goes back to your first house isn't your dream home. Your first house is a house to get into in order to eventually buy your second and your third and your fourth. And whether you take all the equity and roll it into the next house, you can do that. Or if you can figure out a way to save up enough money for a down payment on another house and you can keep the first house, it is a fantastic way to start getting rental property without having to put that 20 or 25% down as a down payment. Now, the other thing I need people to think about is this, is that I think everyone focuses on where they live in their local market. And again, I think part of why they do that is maybe they want to manage the property themselves or they only know their local market. But you might live in a market where it's freaking really expensive and you might not be able to buy a house at all. So maybe where you live, you have to rent, but you can still own real estate by buying rental property in other markets. So that's what I did. And I'm talking to my kids about this right now, where I live in Reno, Nevada, an average home price is now around $600,000. But where I buy rental property in the Midwest, I bought all my homes over the last 5 years between 180 and 250,000. And even if those all went up to where now all those homes are between 2 and 300,000, I can still buy homes there for way less money. And say my daughter and my son and I went in and we all put a third of the money in and bought a house together, it's way less than what they can do here. So don't focus on just where you live. And if where you live doesn't work, reach out to me. I can get you realtors all around the country, whether they're on the West Coast, the East Coast, the Midwest. I know people everywhere. And that's why I buy rentals and other properties, because the key is you have to have a good lender, you have to have a good realtor, and you have to have a good property manager if you're buying homes in an area where you don't live. Because then someone else is going to have to manage those for you. And there's some costs involved in that to think about how all your overall numbers are going to work. So something that you need to think about as far as all that stuff goes. So don't get caught up just in your local market. Don't get caught up when other people are telling you that they're doing. Personal finance is personal and real estate is very personal. And again, whether you're buying single family homes for your primary residence or rental, whether you're buying multifamily, duplex, fourplex, if you go past fourplex, it's a different conversation for a different day. Whether you're buying condos, townhomes, whatever it is in your local market, there's lots of different ways and lots of different strategies and things like that. So here is the truth of all of that, okay? I don't want you to feel that because you might not be able to afford a house to live in right now as your primary residence, you're not behind, you're not priced out, it's not too late, okay? My daughter's feeling this way. She's 24, almost 25, and she is a freaking real estate agent, for God's sakes. But where I live, while she was in college, things got so crazy unaffordable, she can't buy a house here in Reno. But she has found a really good, affordable living situation. So she's able to then have all this extra money to be able to invest in the stock market and put money away for rental property. And she's probably going to buy a house in the Midwest because that's how she can get her entry point into real estate. It might not be here where she lives. And someday it will be, because she's building up enough money and building up enough cash and building up enough reserves where if either someday she has a significant other, which right now she doesn't, or if she decides she wants to rent out some rooms in her house the way her brother did, she will be in a position to do that here locally. And she is 24 and her brother's 29 and have already helped a handful of their friends get into real estate. So real estate should be one of your wealth building tools, but you have to understand how it works, how the loan products works, how putting more or less money down work, and what is going to be in your best interest for you. So if you have questions about all that, reach out to me. You can do this a lot of different ways, and don't listen to people that don't know what they're talking about, okay? It is important. It is part of the wealth building strategy and is something that you need to have in your tool belt. So someday way down the road in the future, you are financially free.